And Laura I talked with Laura earlier today, and she apologized for getting the notes out to us not until today, but with the seedling sale, I know she and the staff were tied up all last week, and so we understand that. But everybody got them, I presume.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Got them, but not read.
Well, I haven't read them all either, Chris, but at any rate, I think we probably ought to start with going into our the reasons for and the declaration of why we're having an electronic meeting. And unfortunately, again, I don't have that information being out here in the mountains. Jerry has usually been pretty good about doing that for me. I see I'm looking around.
My cheat sheet is not here. I'm sorry.
Uh-oh. Does anybody have the cheat sheet that can give us the reason for and the motion for an electronic meeting?
Can we just say
I see
COVID?
Monica looking through her notes.
I can read it if you would like.
Yeah, would you?
Sure. I'll read it. And or Monica, if you have it.
I don't know if this is it. I think it might be. Is it the chapter 1283?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that's it.
All right, I have it. So the determination of electronic meeting. Chapter 1283 of the Virginia 2020 Acts of Assembly addresses the ability of soil and water, conservation districts to hold electronic meetings without the need for a quorum being present in a single location when a state of emergency has been declared pursuant to 44-146-17 of the Code of Virginia. Soil and water conservation districts should make the following determination by motion and vote on the record at the start of any electronic meeting. So motion, I move that the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District Board of Directors has determined the nature of the declared COVID-19 virus emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe for us to assemble in a single location for the purpose of transacting business statutorily required or necessary for us to continue operations and discharge our lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities.
Second.
We have a motion to declare our meeting electronically. Jerry seconded it. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'm presuming the motion carried. Thank you both very much. It might be good just to take a look at the minutes. I think we should probably approve the minutes anyway, but take a look at the minutes before we get started and see if, oops, wait a minute. Yeah, the first thing would be the discussion of the minutes, and I have to find mine. I'm looking at the agenda here for a moment. Do all of you have the minutes?
I think we have them. Laura sent them out, but I haven't had time to read it, so I'm going to abstain.
Do all of you have a copy of the minutes?
Yes.
Say that, Jerry.
I think I've received them.
Is there any, is there a motion to either approve the minutes before we discuss them?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll
We
second.
have a motion to approve the February 23rd minutes. Is there a second?
A second.
Yes.
It's been moved and seconded by Monica. Any further discussion of the minutes? I think it might be good just to look at what we said we were going to try to do this time.
John, if you don't mind, just a point of clarification, Jerry, I just wanted
Any
to
further
make sure
discussion
that
of the minutes?
yes, related to the minutes, I just wanted to make sure that I was well, I guess it would come down to when you have your vote. But Jerry, I just wanted to make sure that I heard correctly your abstention.
I'm going to abstain just because I haven't had the time to read them. I've been
Okay.
reading the better stuff, the
Nope.
good stuff.
If there's no further discussion, all in favor, I'll call the roll. If you're in favor of approving the minutes as presented, signify by saying aye. Director Bilger,
Aye.
Director Bordas,
Aye.
Director Corner,
Aye.
Director Peters is abstaining. So the motion is approved that the minutes are approved. Now, would you all take a quick look at the agenda for just a second? We only have 3 items on the agenda. And I noticed that Laura put down there that if we decide we need to go into closed session to discuss personnel or board performance or any other items, we can do that. If you just look at the agenda items that we have, I'm not so sure it requires us to go into closed session. But do some of you feel like we should?
Let's see how the conversation goes.
Too, if something comes up in the discussion of either the personnel policies or the governance items that they have been discussing that we feel like causes us to go into closed session, we can make that decision at that time.
Right.
But if we're just going to discuss these items, I'm not sure it requires us to go into a closed session. Let's defer that decision then until such time as we decide we need to.
Okay.
Do all of you have the attachments that deal with the personnel policies and the governance?
Yes.
Yes.
I think last time we started with personnel policies. That might be good for us to do this time. In my mind, that's probably one of our more important things we're going to discuss. And I'm not so sure how Monica or Laura, either one of you want to take the lead. We do have the personnel policies, table of contents, and I think you got quite a long document there, about 25 or 30 pages.
Yeah. So, John, if I may, or
Yeah.
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, I think I'm happy to do a quick summary and then Laura can jump in because I am balancing my brain in two different places right this moment. So there's possibility that I may omit something. Just as a quick review, our goals for the personnel policy was to review the policy sections, clarify the roles and responsibilities of the executive director and the board of directors, review and update existing personnel policies, and develop new policies where there appears to be gaps, and help. That's kind of the primary target right now. So
Right.
we've had a couple of meetings and we've been able to basically review a number of the elements. But before I dive into some of that, this is a very big personnel file. So I would suggest to people, if you haven't had a chance to review it, there's two conversations, correct? There's the conversation of, is the wordsmithing of the personnel policies to everyone's liking. So one can go in and say, oh, but we're missing a piece on X or we're missing a piece on Y. But there's also the bigger picture conversation that I think needs to occur as to the clarity of the roles and responsibilities, because I think from that point stems quite a bit of additional conversation. But just to give additional background for the personnel policies review process, we basically reviewed a compilation of Fairfax County policies, which is basically what Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District has been following for decades. That is their mainstay for personnel policy management and how we really emulate, replicate as much of that as we can to kind of follow the county's policies. But we also reviewed independently, not at the sessions, a compilation that Jerry had created, and also did some of our own independent research that we helped weave into certain spaces. Like, do we expand on, for example, equity, inclusion kind of conversations, or, those kinds of things. So we had some background in reviewing other things independently. As we went through this document to this point, really we were following the meeting dates, and our scope consisted of reviewing the previous authority and scope, and then we got through ethics and standards, leave policies, recruitment, examination, appointment, promotions, demotions, separations, retirement. That's where we've gotten to. Excuse me. That's been what we've examined. In those spaces, there's been some language that's been updated a little bit. to reflect some of the nuances of some things that can get missed. But generally speaking, it's really been more of wordsmithing certain things and ensuring that we're including a sentence here or there that is reflective of the expansion of anything that needed to be done. I don't have the specifics to where we wordsmithed here and there. I really don't. I know that those are coming. But generally speaking, what we were hoping to talk about today, and I guess I would suggest that we perhaps consider, we can discuss the authorities and the roles and responsibilities, but I'm not sure if we want to at least have a summary of where we stand in the governance document as well. So I'm not sure how we want to, if we want to outline some of the changes. This is kind of personnel policy wise, some of this stuff is really kind of cut and dry in the sense of authorities we've given to the executive director, and as a board member reviewing this in a committee format to see if there's any major updates or any major changes. As a personnel file, I found myself kind of getting into the nuances and nitty gritty of leave and attendance and things like that. And I was like, well, again, not that it's important to have a fresh eye on it. It's important to look and make sure we're reviewing these things, but we also need to think about the depth in which this is really under the eye of the executive director, and how much befalls us as well. So that's where I think the conversation lies.
Monica, could I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm looking at the personnel policies that document that was transmitted to us today.
Mhm.
And you're kind of all over there. Are we wanting to start at the top of that or move down in someplace in the middle, look at authorities and responsibilities, or how do you suggest we start looking at this? It looks to me like that was the personnel policy outline that we've always had.
It is. I mean, so this is why I'm saying when we have a very comprehensive
Right.
personnel policy guidebook.
Correct.
It's not like we're creating something from scratch. It's been in existence for decades. It's very comprehensive. Whether it's the board before me or the Laura and her staff, whomever, it's a very comprehensive and thoughtfully detailed document. That's why I was saying there's occasional wordsmithing that I was finding myself doing, but it wasn't, I'm not sure if we need to go line by line, but I leave that to the board. My recommendation is that we begin, I think, with the most, I think, pressing conversation, which would be to talk about the roles and responsibilities and clarifying that, because that sets the precedent for certain specific policies within the document.
So that would be authorities and responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
That would be my 2 cents. That would be my
Okay.
recommendation.
Does that suit the rest of the members?
Yeah, I go with that. There is wordsmithing to be done, but I'm not sure we want to do that in the committee meeting.
No.
Monica, if we could lean on you to take, I think I would do just editorial stuff. I would do a track changes and send it to you, and you make decisions on how you want to incorporate it. There are some, I'd say an average 1 every 2 pages, just generally, questions I have or suggestions I have. I was hoping to do this before the meeting, but can't do it. Perhaps each one of us just ought to make those either questions or recommendations. Send a list in to Monica and let her slice and dice and come back with the recommendations.
We can do that.
I can go through a couple of big ticket items if you want, but I don't. I'm not sure this is the forum to do it. I do want to say that what we have here is in the main very clear, very purposeful. The remaining questions about delegation of authorities, I shouldn't say it that way. The remaining questions about communications, where the board needs to understand decisions that are made by staff. I think a couple more tweaks there, but we're close. And I think that the direction is overall very good.
Any other comments? Thank you, Jerry. It's awfully quiet.
Well, I think that, I think when being part of this, diving into it, you just realize how much of this personnel manual already was in existence, and just how in-depth it is and how detailed it is. And it's a very thorough document, again, minus a few wordsmithing things here and there. And some changes, a little, and I think that my concern is, what is the concern of the board, I guess, because it's detailed in what it's what it's set out to do for personnel. And we have an executive director who's been authorized by the board to act as the head of the soil and water conservation district when it comes to personnel management. So the question comes into play is, what out of this jumps out that isn't correct? Because I don't see it. My recommendation is that this follows an appropriate pattern of how the Soil and Water Conservation District has conducted itself between board roles and executive director role. And I think, I think that maybe there's a conversation that we still haven't gotten to completely down the road with a few other items, but I think that,
Monica, could I ask one last question about this?
Yeah.
What I'm reading under authorities and responsibilities, where it says board of directors and then the executive operations committee and executive director, is that already in our personnel policies, or are some of these things being recommended by your committee?
no, so most everything was in here already. There was a few things that we clarified slightly just to re-emphasize, so things were a little less confusing, but the thrust of it is the language was here. It wasn't new, it's just that it had to be elevated a little, I guess, or clarified a little bit more, just to ensure that it was easier to understand. I think it is. So my question then to the rest of the board is there anything here that doesn't seem to, do you still have a question on where your authority lies? Because I don't. So I'm curious, this then comes into the next question of, where do people stand in their understanding of their role and responsibility?
Okay, I understand, and I appreciate that. Since I haven't had a chance to really look at this very closely, I'm not sure I'm prepared to answer that question that you've asked, but it's the right question, I think. But as of right now, these are our policies with what little wordsmithing you folks did to clarify things.
I
Mhm.
would note there are at least two major things in this section 1 that certainly, I mean, you obviously consider it. One is, we didn't have an executive operations committee the last
No.
time any policies were made. And I think it's good there. That's essentially our personnel committee, is what they call it in the Virginia guides. The other is, we've got duties of the ops manager laid out, which is new. I think it's valuable. I think it's good, but to say it's just all the same stuff, it would be packaged.
Right. No, I didn't mean to say it's all the same. I'm just saying there's not.
I know you like it all, right?
No, No, I mean, well, we worked on adding stuff, but it's very functional. It's very administrative. It's very, it's thorough. It's a little, that's what I meant. It's elevated. It's a little more thorough. It's a little more specific in certain spaces.
Are we gonna go section by section and ask questions? Or are we going to send?
We
comments
certainly can.
To one person?
We can, Jerry.
I'm glad to do it either way. I mean, again, John, like you, I haven't been able to read this in detail, but I still have some things that I'm not trying to be picky. I just want to get some clarification.
So maybe it would be easier if people have questions, then maybe we start there.
You want to go back page by page?
Should we just start? Should we just start at the top? Monica?
Yeah, that's fine.
Because people may not have any questions at all. For example, it starts with the code of ethics.
Right.
Anybody, and we can always come back and make additional comments after today.
And let me be clear, I
Yeah.
have the most current version up. I am not comparing it to a previous document. So I apologize if my brain is not reflective of what was. I am looking at what is. So I'm gonna,
Understand.
I don't
But does-
have two up.
Does anybody have any questions on the code of ethics that they'd like to bring up or ask the committee to look at? Yes, Jerry. Jerry.
Very first paragraph states the code was prepared by staff. What? This is upper level. This is top first paragraph in our personnel
Yeah.
policy developed by staff. Why point that out? Staff
Why
drafted it.
Why point that out? Good question.
Well, I mean, in all honesty, I mean, I'll let Laura speak to this, but part of what we've all been hearing before in the past is that this is a small office and it's incredibly important to make sure that ideas and thoughts of everyone involved are integrated in personnel management, especially when you're talking about ethical or unethical behavior. So I think it's very important to showcase that, you know, this isn't a staff of 300. And if Laura spoke to them, and I believe like there was, and forgive me, this has been a very long process, but I know that there was outreach done to staff to ensure that certain pieces were involved, but also this follows I think the Fairfax one too, right, Laura? So I'm trying to recall.
Monica, I think you're absolutely right, but this is just me again. I would feel that who prepared the code of ethics doesn't really belong in the code of ethics.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The
Next.
code of ethics could be a standalone document.
Well, we could just say the code is intended to complement, not replace all professional code of ethics.
Exactly.
Sure.
That's the main point of that sentence. And saying
Again, sometimes this is the little wordsmithing. It's fine. It's helpful.
Yeah.
this is small. I'm going to raise a rhetorical question on the word equitable. About halfway down the page, in the second bullet, equitable services. Until I read a column in the Post like yesterday or today.
Where are you, Jerry?
About
Yeah, where
halfway
are
down
you?
the page, the second bullet.
Public service.
It says,
Okay.
service focus on delivery of quality and equitable services.
Uh-huh.
Equitable is a very important catchword right now, but there's a difference between equitable and equal.
Right.
Equality versus equity.
Right.
And to the extent that equitable, and I never even thought about this before, means we're going to do something to make up past ills. I don't think we're doing that.
Actually, I would argue that's not true, because based on the questions I've asked at the technical review committee, because I actually raised this since it was Fairfax was really important to me when I was back at Audubon and trying to understand how we're working with things. I even raised this at a technical review committee about how we're working and to be more equitable to ensure that we're putting ourselves and our projects in spaces that have in the past been either not reflected upon enough, or, you know, there's communities of color and communities of socioeconomic disadvantage that haven't been addressed. And what are we doing to kind of to remedy that? And I recall both Adria, actually, and maybe someone else, I feel like we're addressing, and it might have been, oh, I'm forgetting the name of the lovely young lady that left.
Christina
Christina was
Claren.
very, very adamant about how this is something that they were implementing and addressing and looking at through a completely equitable lens to ensure that they were in sync with the county. So I do recall that. And I think, yeah, I don't think it should be thrown up there willy-nilly. I definitely think we have to make sure that we're doing it. But from my understanding, from the limited time I've heard that we are, or that the staff is.
It certainly has become, unfortunately, it's a catchword. It's a perfectly good word. And I'm not suggesting we take it out. I just want to see if anybody else feels that we should be talking about equal services, objective services provided to everyone, as opposed to
Right.
equitable, which means making up for past ills. I don't think we've had past ills, so anyway, okay, enough discussion. If nobody else wants to weigh in, let's move on.
Well, no, I think that's a.
It's not exactly our past ills, not the soil and water district ills. It could be anyone's. It could be the county's. It could be anything. I don't think that we should take it on as a personal, crusade. But I also think that we have to, as a public organization, we have to take responsibility and pledge to do those sort of things. So there's no ills that we've done that soil and water has done or that
That's
we
not-
know of,
Right.
but
right,
we're
that's
not
right.
making up for anything. But that's a good point you raised, but I think that we also have to not take that personally, but also understand that there are a lot of people in our county who do feel like the county has illed them. And we are considered the county, whether you like it or not, Jerry. Because that's how people view us, because we're associated with the county. Whether or not we're the district or extension or anything else, they see the county over top first.
Well, and
So,
I have no problem with, for instance, one of my recommendations for the strategic plan is that we designate areas of the county where there is a heightened need for food availability, and that we target those for looking for agricultural opportunities. I mean, I'm all for that.
absolutely, absolutely. But don't take it as like you feel like you're making up for ill. It's definitely something that we all have to take on as a responsibility as public
Responsibility
servants.
of government.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I didn't think I heard Jerry say it quite that way. I thought he was just asking, do we want to say equitable or equal?
I
And
think
they are different.
they are very different, but I think for the purposes, I think if we say equal, we are showcasing that we are out of touch with what the intent is of the district to do. So I don't think saying equal is appropriate. I think we have to, it's not just saying it because it's the popular word. We're saying it because that's actually the correct terminology. Equal was probably incorrect for a very long time. It's just we've learned and grown that this is actually the word we should be using. This is the level we should be striving for. This is what we should be achieving as a you know.
Okay. I didn't mean that to be a major topic of conversation. I just raised the
You
This
question.
is
kind of
why
did.
things get caught up. This is why these things
You
take
kinda
more
did.
than 2 hours. We're only on sentence 2, Jerry.
Can we get to page 5?
You can't hardly see me. I'm in the dark here, but I'm kind of smiling because this is a big political argument, as you know, today. And what we're saying, what some could say we're saying is we don't want to provide our services equally to everybody. If you take the word equal out.
Yeah.
So I don't really have a favorite word to use here. If equitable is the one that most of the board members would prefer we use at this point, I'm fine with that. But they don't mean the same
No.
at all. And just
And
understand.
I would probably say that if we were to talk to, the soil and water, our national association, or our association in Virginia, I would gather to say that they would be definitely using the term equitable versus equal, that's where they would go.
And you're right, that's where they have gone.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we just have to,
They want to be politically correct.
right.
Okay. So it sounds like, at least for the moment, at least 3 directors would like it to remain as equitable.
Yes.
Okay, anything else under Code of Ethics that anybody, Jerry, you had looked at that, I guess, the hardest,
No, that's,
and I appreciate that.
I'm on page 5 already.
What's that?
I'm up to page 5 for comments.
Oh, okay, does anybody else have any comments on the Code of Ethics? How about statement of conduct, standards of conduct? And like I said, I apologize for not having seen this until just before the meeting, so,
I think, yeah, under standards of comment, on the second page of that, which is page 5 of the whole document, under protection and proper use of data, property, funds, and records. I feel strongly that the proper use of funds depends in great part on proper timesheets being turned in timely. And that our staff should understand that that's a factor that, you know, will be considered in their performance.
Well,
Add a bullet for timely and accurate submittal of timesheets.
that's in their responsibilities, I believe, but hold on, let me
Is
look.
it?
I don't know. I thought I saw that somewhere.
Okay, well, whatever, as long as it's in there. We've made a big deal of that in the past. I think
I
it's
mean,
appropriate that it's in here.
is the notion of timely timesheet preparation in here someplace?
I've made a note of it. We can take a look and make sure that that's captured in there.
Does everyone agree that that should be a point of,
I mean,
and we ought to be able, if we're going to demote somebody based upon timesheet submittal being late or poor,
Well,
it ought to be in the policy that they should do it.
well, now, there was,
Yes, I agree that it ought to be in there.
but, hold on. All right.
well, I think in any organization, forgetting the ramifications, that timely timesheet preparation is something every employee is expected to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Timely and accurate.
So, well, yes. So I presume that
Well,
it's
yeah,
wise to mention it.
I guess we can specifically mention it. I think that there was, demonstrate personal accountability to the integrity of the work of the district was there, because there's so many pieces of accountability that I think, but if we feel the need to spell it out, I think that's fine. I understand that. I think that there's failing to report, you're prohibited from failing to report to work commitments as scheduled. So one could say that your timesheets are a failure of reporting to a time commitment. I mean, that's, communicating schedule changes there are things in here that, like, I understand, but I having reviewed a lot of personnel, some of those don't go into the minutia of timesheets. It's captured in a more accountability statement that is then specified usually by the executive director or the boss of whoever is of that individual, because there is an accountability. Different people might have different expectations if they're your boss. And so then you're stating that this person has to.
Right. How does the rest of the board feel? Do you think a particular bullet on timely and accurate timesheet recording is important? I'm sure Jerry does. Adria?
You muted, Adria.
I think she's muted.
Sorry. I think that maybe this sentence right here on page 5 might be able to be enhanced a little bit. Employees are prohibited from knowingly falsifying or conspiring to falsify reports, records, resume, time and attendance reports, work, compensation claims, travel or expense vouchers. You could probably take that information in that area, that bullet, and enhance that a little bit to be what you want, Jerry? Is that maybe
Well,
what you're talking
these
about?
prohibitions, the expectation that people are supposed to submit them is not a prohibition.
Well, I mean, if you're not submitting them, that's also just not doing the report.
Well,
Right.
no, I
Um,
also just want to acknowledge that it is also incorporated under the leave section as it relates to the leave records as well. So I think it's totally fine to incorporate it into the standards of conduct.
Oh, I see it.
It's one little line, and it is something that is important.
So Laura, you would not have any concern about adding that someplace?
No, I think it's a pretty minor addition from my
It is.
standpoint.
Chris?
I absolutely think it should be in there with all the details that go into everything else, just filling out a timesheet and the requirement to have an effective timesheet system should be in
It sounds
here.
like accurate and timely time reporting is something we want to incorporate someplace in there.
Chris, you were mentioning something about a timesheet system.
Well, you can't have accurate timesheet reporting unless you have a system to do it. And as I recall, over the last couple of years, the timesheet mechanism is evolving.
There's been a timesheet system in place ever since I've been here, and we have yes, we have evolved it over the last couple of years, but it did not prevent folks from using the previous system as well.
Right. I wasn't suggesting it did, but we just need to ensure that there is one for people to follow.
So I think what Laura said is that there is.
I didn't dispute that, but it could disappear, or it could not be, you could be held to a standard for filling out where it's not. All I'm saying is there needs to be a method to announce and verify of what the timesheet policy is. And I think that should be in here with that, all employees will be expected to follow.
But in a personnel policy, I would think you'd only need to reference that system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Laura, is that system still undergoing some evaluation and review and tinkering by you folks?
No, we have a good system that's in place now, and no real tinkering is involved. We do add additional timesheet line items, as new projects come in, for example, the new NACD grant, so folks can track their time against that as well.
And if
But
I
you could-
may, it's actually already in here. It's under the office manager that administers the payroll system, including the time tracking process and year-end taxes. So it is acknowledged. I mean, if we're going to acknowledge it in every section, we're going to have a problem. So if there's a need to acknowledge something, maybe that's a clarification of where things go, but we don't have to, note something in every section. Otherwise, it's going to become a 70-page document. So I think that if you wanted to add it to what Adria's point was under the protection and proper use of data, funds, and records, we could add the bullet point to the expected to, add that there somewhere. Because the process exists and it's already noted in here, so we don't need to add that again.
And there's
In my
this
opinion.
standards of conduct, again, is not all inclusive. There are certain aspects certainly that go along with just business, and things like routine, timely, accurate timesheets are something that is expected, and is shared at the time of any orientation that we have with somebody. So, and it is a routine that folks get into. It's expected every 2 weeks. So these are some of those kinds of things that do exist. I think it is not a problem at all to incorporate it into the standards of conduct. Fully support it. So we'll look to do that.
I'm just curious, Laura, did you say right now that Heather has actually 2 time systems that she does not? Okay,
No.
so we just have our system.
We just have the one system that was
Very good.
rolled out over a year ago.
Good. Is there anything else under standards of conduct that somebody wants to point out now or ask a question about? We're probably down then to one of the more important sections, and that deals with authorities and responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else start off. Okay. Under Board of Directors, the third bullet. I would suggest deleting, including adjustments to salaries. And I would ask the question, why was that specifically put in here at this level? Before I recommend we take it off, let me hear why it's there. If I think, because I think it's sufficient to say that the Board of the Directors will establish new positions in consultation with the Executive Director and authorize the hiring and management of personnel. If you're going to call out specific elements of managing personnel, then they all should be here or none.
Good point. Anybody?
Well, I thought one of our tasks is a fiduciary responsibility, so I thought you just need to have that included because of our fiduciary role, but I don't know. That's why it's more of a, I'm open to that because I'm not, we have to discuss and approve budget issues. So I think that because that, if it has budget implications, I'm not sure if that needs to be discussed. So I don't know. It was there.
I don't think this is the place. I think that we're going to be, we go through these individual parts of management, and each one in at least the initial ones we've said, at this point, consult with the board or approval of the board or whatever to pull out one thing, which is adjustment to salaries. I understand there's a fiduciary responsibility, financial responsibility, but if you're going to pull out one part of personnel management and say, maybe this is the only one that we're going to authorize.
Yeah, I'm not wedded to it. It was there. I'm not, it doesn't really impact me. I do recall conversations, people being concerned about.
We hear you, Monica. And in addition, management of personnel could include adjustment of salaries.
Sure. Yeah.
Adrian, Chris, how do you feel about that? Could we put a period after personnel and strike including adjustments to salaries?
Yep. If that is what the consensus is.
It's fine.
How about you, Chris?
I'm trying to figure out exactly how we do adjust salaries, because that was something that got kind of behind in the last couple of years, and we still have work to do. And that should be done. I'm trying to look at a variety of things on my little phone here at the same time and figure out how we do the salary reconciliation at the end of the year as part of a review process, and how that actually gets factored in. We did one for the new position, Dan and Ashley, but there are everybody else left.
If I can just ask and remind that if we're going to be discussing particular personnel related items, including salary adjustments. Please not use staff names.
Yeah.
Just again,
Maybe
to
we
keep
should go into a closed session
Yeah.
if we're getting too deep into that.
I'd actually kind of like to just sort of bring us back, because Chris, I hear the point that you're making, and I think that that's something really important that we take into consideration as we're thinking about the implementation process of a lot of these kinds of things. And that's something that you're right, that the how do we do it, we're not there yet. Right now, we just need to acknowledge that, you know, these are the aspects that the board is going to be responsible for into the future, and that we're going to be working together on this. While we've made some significant enhancements over these last 6 months, really, well, gosh, no, we're really looking at last 10 months. I think that those are some of the things that we'll have to continue to work toward in the future. So if we can maybe put a pin in that part of the conversation, and definitely not losing sight of it. And I think that that's important conversation, perhaps that even the finance committee can take the lead on here in the future.
Right. I did have a draft memo. I haven't sent it out because of the seedling. And I realized everybody was too busy in April. And then I don't know if it exists because my email is gone.
Well, take this into consideration as well. I mean, as we're heading into strategic planning, that would be a nice thing to incorporate into our strategic plan for the next 4 years. So again, we can prioritize that in the next year. But again, I think that's a conversation for perhaps another day.
Yeah, this is
Although I believe that if we're going to define authorities, that is an authority, whether we come in.
well, that's in your
What was that?
That's in the final bullet point, though. You're talking, there is an authority for payment of monetary incentives, awards, bonuses to employees, exceptional service achievements. That's in there. So we're conflating two things here. There's just the overarching hiring authority of the executive director. We don't want to conflate that with, or the establishing new positions. We don't want to conflate that with the financial. This is a bullet point about establishing new positions in consultation with the executive director. And so the fiduciary piece, the fiscal piece, that's actually even in a further, but it's, you know, you don't go into minutia of details, you go into kind of a broad thing. And then again, implementation is a little different, but the authorization from the board's perspective is bullet pointed at the end.
The end bullet point solely deals with monetary incentives, awards, and bonuses, and I don't consider salary any of those three.
Yeah, let me make a further point. I just flipped ahead, looking for where else we talk about the process of giving people increases in their salary. And it's really not discussed anywhere. Was it going to be in personnel management, Laura? Is there some place where we talk about salary adjustments? Performance management? I don't know.
Salary adjustments, yes, would be well. I think we do need to think about where that fits, and certainly under performance management, there's a aspect to that. There, I would suggest that we actually, given, I think we're kind of trying to fit this in particular places. Let's create its own bullet. I think the point that we want to make is that it's the board provides the authority to make salary adjustments. That's the way it's been, and that's the way that it ought to continue well into the future. And so I think maybe we just keep that as its own separate bullet. Chris, did you want to say something? Chris, did you say?
I look at the authorities and responsibilities. Some of them are clear board of directors, some are clear executive directors, and some are joint. And it's easy to argue that the two most important things that we do are our fiduciary duty, that we spend county and state funds appropriately and to track that, and hiring. And the district is our staff. And we only have 7 people, except for the past year, hiring came up somewhat infrequently. But I believe that hiring and bonuses and salaries should be specifically addressed in separate meetings with the board of directors jointly with the executive director. And at the end of every year, salaries should be looked at if we look at salaries. Now, if we look at a process and the difference of how you have a process of something should happen and defining it under authorities and responsibilities, I did a lot of work on hiring when I was a fairly senior executive. I look at when we've got a new vacancies or potentially a need of new vacancies, that needs analysis should be planned with essentially a mini SWOT analysis of our existing staff, our experience matrix, looking at, you know, who is starting to get older. Should we have a replacement mentor protege desire? And that would, you know, do we need a registration? Are we going to have part-time, full-time? And that would generate the general requirements of a job description. I think the discussion is Laura may have it with the staff and then bring staff meetings, but we should have a meeting just like this for every hire that comes up there. And Laura should be given specific authority and direction on what we do in a joint discussion. So after that meeting, the executive director should prepare the job description, the proposed salary range, the hiring status and timing, the dates, the panel members, and how it's going to be interviewed. And that should then be reviewed and approved by the board of directors. That should not be an executive director just going along.
Yeah, that's
then the executive director, after that approval, advertise and receive applications, notify the board just informally of whether suitable applications actually have applied, and we're going forward with the panel, or we need to re-advertise and do it all again. The panel's held, assuming there are good candidates, and the executive director presents to the board of directors the chosen candidate, the qualifications, the salary, why they chose her, and the draft offer letter. And again, the board of directors votes and approves that letter.
Right.
I can't believe you do it anywhere any differently.
I can give you an example of how it's done very differently.
Oh, I've seen 2 examples how it was done differently.
No, I'm with another organization on another board where it's done very differently. You have a table of organization which lists the staff members. And as long as the staff member is listed and is part of your table of organization, the management of that staff, including the salary adjustments, is up to the executive director. It's not up to the board, not up to the board. However, should the executive director or the board decide they wanted to add to that staff and increase it, that discussion would come before the full board.
Exactly.
As would, now I'm presuming in that first case that everything is within the budget, because that's where the board of directors has its influence, is in the budget. But if if Laura is going to add a staff person, it's going to add to the budget, then that's a decision she should come back to the board with. And well, I'm talking about another organization here, but that's where the executive director would come back to the board and ask the board's approval. So there is a different model, I guess I would say, Chris, than the one you're proposing.
That's exactly right. And to your point, John, in all the small nonprofits I've worked in and in the large ones, that's the way it's been conducted. The executive director,
Absolutely.
the board has not gotten into the minutia of that level of hiring. And in fact, in past experience, that has not turned out well for the organization when the board is that invested in the details. That is not a typical board position.
Jerry?
Let me go back to something that I'm not going to talk about people, but I know John is concerned about grievances. As I understand the way boards are set up, there are 3 steps in the grievance process.
Wait, can we just, Jerry, I don't want to interrupt you, but we're talking about hiring. I don't know if we should get into grievances. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
Jerry, did you want
I'm
to
just
talk?
Talking
asking.
about board responsibilities and how thorough they should be. That was the topic of the table. I'm gonna
Okay,
work
sorry.
backwards. For you, Monica, I'm gonna work backwards. If the 3 steps are the immediate supervisor, who would be the executive director, perhaps the chairman of the board, or the chair of the executive communications committee, and then the full board. Now, the prospect of the board being faced with no background, with no information, with no history of individuals involved, how is the board, as the final authority? We don't have a circuit court to go to like they do in the county. We don't go to the Virginia Association with grievances. The final judges are the board. And I don't think I want to be blindsided by a huge problem that's been festering and having had no insight to it. So this is one of the reasons why I would like to see communications between the executive director and the board be specified if need be in the policy, so that we in fact are informed when something goes south in advance before it turns into a demotion, firing, separation situation.
So again, we're going back to this really, really core issue that I think stemmed a lot of what this is causing. And I think that if we're going to talk about a specific issue, then we need to go into a closed session.
This is not a specific issue. This is a
It
general.
is though,
It's how
because
you deal with
Well,
people and how you keep from setting up your board for the kind of anxiety that this situation is talking about.
I think it's really interesting to hear you say this because that is a process. Because I completely agree, communication between the executive director and board of directors is extremely important, which is why this executive operations committee has been created for it to be able to have those kinds of points of communication. And we've had this committee now for 2 or 3 years and going into closed session several times to discuss personnel related issues prior to any sort of action that has had to take place. So that level of communication has absolutely happened. And I think it's imperative, certainly those are the kinds of things that happen during closed session. So they're not documented in the way that you can necessarily refer back to. And maybe that's a challenge. But that's absolutely, again, the Executive Operations Committee creates that forum for that conversation. And it's a conversation that has happened well before this year. So I think the point is made in regards to ensuring that our policies highlight and reinforce the importance of communications between the executive director and the board of directors. I think that that's really important.
And that communication needs to happen as, this is what I plan to do, or this is what we need to discuss to do, and not, this is what I did.
And that's always the way that it has been, and it is the way that it will continue to be.
That's true.
Because that, from my standpoint, is also really important to make sure that you all understand where we're headed. Now, there are things that do continue throughout the process. And there are things that sometimes I even get blindsided by, and it's unfortunate. So those are some things that, again, we can continue. It is just as important for me to communicate with you all as it is for you to communicate and ask questions of me. So if something is unclear, it's really important that you share that with me and we continue to be able to move forward together, because how we work together is not just a one-dimensional thing. It's not just me reporting to you. It's got to be 2 ways.
Absolutely.
And in that, I would say I am a little concerned about, and this is the role of responsibilities. We're going to have to be very clear, because I feel like I've seen an overstep from the board where there hasn't been communication, where there hasn't been a conversation that included all of the board members. And I don't think that's the way that we're set up to govern. We are one body, aside from the chairman, who has a few specific roles and duties as being an authorized, the head and in the grievance process. There's a specific set of how he conducts or she conducts themselves. But Yeah, there's concern about communication all around because it feels like there has been definitely some missteps. And if that's not outlined clearly here, then maybe that's a separate conversation. But that's of concern too.
Jerry, did you have something else?
Not after that.
Anybody else?
I do. One of our goals is also to protect the executive director. And when responsibility is shared, then if something goes wrong, then Laura has backup. And I have personal experience. 30 years ago, I fired somebody. And that person had a good friend that was a very sleazy attorney and sued the company, me personally, on 2 different levels. My human resources department was extremely professional and good. And the first thing they did was to take me out of it and protect me. And they did it very, very well. They dealt with the county and they dealt with the state, and both of them were dealing with the individual that I had fired. The best thing I did was when I had those discussions with the woman that was fired, I was the department head. I had her group leader with me, who was also a woman. And everything was very well documented. You know, there was a half an inch of discussion on that termination. And it was clear that multiple people were involved with the decision, that the documentation of the infractions were well documented, and both the county and the state came back to our human resources person and said, no problem, it goes away, there's no merit to this case. When Laura takes unilateral decisions, she exposes not only us, ignorance is no excuse on our part, but she exposes herself. And
Chris, she doesn't make
to protect-
unilateral decisions. We have an executive office committee that she comes and speaks to us about every single time. There is no unilateral decision making aside from what she's authorized to do by the board in her job description. There's nothing that's been taken out of context for that. So I'm not quite certain.
Let's make sure we don't cut people off now, please. Keep this kind of civil if we can. But I would just offer a comment before I let you back in, Chris, that first of all, I'd agree with Monica. Laura doesn't make unilateral decisions. And secondly, you're absolutely right that our board does exist to give her support and protection. Chris?
Yes, I agree. Along with that, when I talked about the planning for a new hire, I've been involved in hundreds of them. They are opportunities for dealing with ideas. It's like a little strategy session, and people feel good generally after it. It's collaboration, it's communications, it's what do we need, what can we do, what kind of person are we looking for? And in this specific one that's most recently, do we need a registration, and is 3/4 time adequate, or do we need a full time? That was not discussed in a way that was open and strategy oriented.
You're back now talking about an individual. Do we need to go into closed session?
I'm talking about a process that these, you know, some people could say this is all details, it's in the weeds. There's a level of opportunity moving forwards and looking at strategy that we all should be involved in. It's what we do. We're close to all the staff. It's not like we have an organization that we don't know everybody and we're off doing something else. We're all out there packaging seedlings and stuff with them. You know, we're meeting, you know, under a normal year. That planning is critical for understanding and all buying in of what we do. And I can't see signing an offer letter and having a decision made and then just a month later saying, well, here's what I did. Here's, you know, that should be our decision, again, because that protects the executive director.
I think that there's a fundamental, I'm sorry, Chris, excuse me.
Go ahead.
Well, Chris was done. Laura?
I think that there is a fundamental definition of staff that needs to take place, because I think that this is where we're really getting hung up. And I think that it really influences a lot of our policies, our procedures, and different things. And there may be just a fundamental difference of opinion in terms of how our organization has run in the past. And where some, Chris, I mean, you're right, your suggestion is taking it in a very different direction than the way that it has operated in the past. So that's an area where, you know, we need to have a clear definition, because that impacts the way that I do things significantly. So I think from my standpoint, again, as your executive director, I need some clarity in terms of where and how our board would collectively like to go. And we hear two different opinions on it right now. So I think that's something, again, that as a board, you know, and with myself, we really need to define. Because again, let's knock on wood, we don't have to address, you know, any sort of vacancy here in the near term. But I think the process that we have right now has worked. It has worked well. There's really nothing broken with it. But if there is an interest in doing something differently, I need to hear that from the board. I need a collective direction forward. So, and if that's something worth discussing and we think that we could do that, you know, amongst ourselves, that's great. But I, you know, again, that's a fundamental thing, the foundational thing for us that we need to decide.
We do. That's true.
And that's why this personnel policy manual is why I was reticent to continue, because I feel like we're lacking this we're very divided in how we view the board's role. It appear and we've acted on that. It's not even how we view it. We have acted in a capacity that's very different. And I think that it has really negative long-term impacts. So the sooner we can coalesce around an agreement, and some may be happy, some may not be, as to the direction of the board's governance roles and the executive director's role, then I think it stalls all of our other progress, because we have to get that answered. And there is a fundamental divide in how this is viewed right now.
Monica, may I ask you another question?
Yes.
In this in this authorities and responsibilities section, where it
Yes.
says the board of directors and the executive director, was that information that is new that you and your subcommittee have actually prepared? Leave out the executive ops committee for a minute. Are the roles of those two groups, individuals or groups, are those things that we already had in place, or have you embellished that, added to it?
There wasn't much added. The majority of it, and Laura, please speak up because this was one of the first things we did, and it was back in February, John, so my apologies.
Yeah.
But we reviewed different, and I mentioned this on another call. I personally reviewed different board roles and executive director roles in a variety of different publications and through some research. And then we looked at what we had. The majority of this is what we had. My recommendation was to continue on with a few wordsmithing and tweaking, to continue in the space that the Soil and Water Conservation District has been in for the past 40 years, with the authority granted to the executive director. And that's where I landed. And that was where I wanted to confirm that, you know. where that was my recommendation, is that there is no fundamental difference in how we conduct ourselves. We have strategic planning, we have these specific spaces, but the establishment of a new protocol of how Laura hires or fires, or, creating a whole new additional system on top of the one that currently exists,
Well,
I'm not in
Monica,
favor of.
Monica,
So
I'm
I'm
sorry,
not sure where
I
that
can't
goes
stand
in.
anymore. We're
But-
not changing
but the-
systems.
But
We're
the,
just specifying some things that have been taken for granted in the past. It's not
But the-
reinventing a
but the-
system.
but the bullets under Board of Directors and under Executive Director, those for the most part were already part of our policies.
Correct.
I just want to make a point that we have had in our policy document that we follow Fairfax County's policies for a long time. So the authorities section is part of Fairfax County's policies. And what we have done is we have taken that section in particular and highlighted where there are aspects for the board, where there are aspects for the Executive Operations Committee, which, as Jerry pointed out, really kind of serves as in part, it serves many different hats, but one of those hats is as Personnel Committee as well, and then the Executive Director and the Office Manager. So there's a large number of different roles and responsibilities. We also took a look at, again, reference back to the Virginia Code, made sure that if there was anything specific in that needed to be called out, that we incorporated that. Anything that was within the DCR guidelines, incorporating that in, and again, making sure that those roles were clearly defined. But there is more that's added to it. For example, the office manager roles, that's a unique thing to us. Some of the things that relates to the executive director really, again, has more to do with the way that we do business. It's trying to, again, recognize the role and authorities of the board of directors and the executive committee. The executive committee as that space for conversation, discussion, board meetings, board of directors, the whole board as the authority. My role in terms of making sure that we're bringing good, suggestions to the table, having that space for conversation, asking questions, when necessary as well. So that's really sort of what has been the approach to defining those authorities. We have really, these are sort of again, we're documenting the tacit policies that we've had.
Thank you, Laura.
It's not a
Understand.
revolutionary change.
I'm sorry, Jerry, I didn't hear you.
We're not making revolutionary changes. We're making clarifications and enhancements. So this notion that we got divided into two camps, one going one totally different way, is, Monica, I think is wrong. Can we go to the next comment? Does anybody else have comments on the executive director part of this? I'd suggest, and this is just a matter of parallelism, so it stands out the way it is. The next to the last bullet under the executive director starts off with, and this is the only bullet that does this, the executive director has delegated authority to yada, yada, yada. To make that parallel with the rest of them, and it says at the end, won't take effect until approved by the director. I suggest we say to recommend changes to the benefits, options, and conditions offered on through to the board of directors, just to recommend them. I mean, that's what.
Wait, for each bullet, Jerry?
No, just this one. The rest of them are to do something.
Yeah.
And this bullet stands out just
Oh.
about parallelism, but as long as no change shall be made in effect until approved by the board of directors, you're recommending to the board of directors that you make these changes. So this is wordsmithing, but for some reason, somebody felt necessary to put delegated authority in there, which
Yeah.
is what we're doing, but let's
Yeah.
make them parallel.
And let me just say, I'm sorry, Jerry. I'm sorry. I can tell you, I know that one was one that was pulled straight from Fairfax County. It was, and that's a very, very reasonable change. I mean,
Yep.
very, very easy change to make. Thank you.
in the, like the fifth or sixth bullet, it says to publicize and recruit qualified personnel for competitive service. I don't know what competitive service is in regard to our district. Is that a word that just came over from Fairfax County? And I will say elsewhere, we talk about merit and non-merit. Do we have parallel personnel classifications like that?
Yes. Yes, we do. And I think it really has more to do with basically we fall under a merit system, which means that we hire folks based upon their ability to their qualifications to be able to do the job, essentially, you know, and their abilities to do the work. So that is something we actually discussed at one of our recent meetings. I'm trying to remember, may have been in the more recent one in terms of hiring. Forgive me, it's blurring together a little bit for myself. Competitive service, that is something pulled over from Fairfax County. It means that we go through the interview process. That's our preferred process. So, when we get to the hiring section, you'll see that we do give space to be able to do promotions as well. But based upon the conversation, you know, from the summer, I think that there was a strong recognition, that the preferred method is to provide those interviews, unless again there's a recommendation that comes forward and we receive board approval to be able to move forward on it. So that's the way that hiring section is laid out. So, but that's what that means.
So competitive.
That hiring in promotion is from an internal existing staff, not from an outside perspective, right?
For a
Yeah,
promotion, yes, that would be from just internally. And our section on hiring goes into that a little bit more. So anything that is promoted outside, again, heard y'all loud and clear this past summer, and that's totally fine. We would go through a competitive process. However, what we do allow is space for the executive director to come to the board and provide a suggestion. And it would be the board's discretion as to whether or not to move forward with a direct hire or to go back through the interview process. But it gives that space for conversation, and you know, it can pass, it cannot pass, and that's fine. But it just want to again provide us with that level of this is the preferred route. However, if there is an option that somebody wants to take, we have the option to have the conversation.
Yeah, including
And
promotion.
Laura, on all your vacancy announcements, I'm sure you have the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are needed for that job.
Correct. Sorry, Jerry, were you going to say something else?
I was going to say later on, I've got a note, I might as well bring it up now, about interns. Interns aren't competitive service, right?
Well, we do actually go through an interview process for interns.
Oh, really?
We do. We've got a lot of people very interested, especially for those that are paid. We feel that that's really very important.
Yeah, my feeling
Volunteers,
is
we
that,
don't necessarily go through a competitive process.
yeah, my feeling is that as far as board oversight of hiring interns, that's something I would leave entirely to you and the people, the staff who would be working with the intern. I don't think the board needs to review those.
And I agree with that. I don't think we need to be involved with part-time, short-term interns.
Right.
Laura, with the part that you just said about the opportunity to hire somebody from outside directly, where is that discussed?
That would be under the hiring section. Let me get to the page here.
Well, I don't have pages. All I have is just a long scroll.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm the same way, Chris.
Don't
It
have
would
pages.
be, it's going to be under the recruitment, selection, appointment, and probation process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I remember seeing it.
Let me see. Essentially, again, it's a brief statement, but the announcement period for job vacancies shall be at least 2 weeks unless otherwise recommended by the executive director and authorized by the board of directors. So again, that would be something that we would discuss as part of the plan. If there was somebody, we would you know, just again, as I've always done, bring it forward. And then again, if I receive authority from the board of directors to move forward, then that's great. If not, then, you know, we go through the process.
Well, I think it's a valuable thing to remain in here. We all know people fruit and talk to colleagues in the field, and sometimes something comes up. It's not like there's full authority to just hire someone. It's a recommendation that's authorized by the board, and I think that that's a very valuable and useful, knowing that you know everyone in the community and your staff know people in the community. It's a valuable and useful resource to have, to be able to connect and with the knowledge of someone that might be coming in. That would be a huge asset to the Soil and Water Conservation District. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion.
Would that be possible within the county?
Are you asking if the county could do the same thing?
Yes.
It's my understanding that they can, however, they can't be promoted to a higher position. It would be a lateral move or something, would,
Something
for lack
equivalent.
of a better word, a demotion, but a lower position.
I'd like to know clarification on that, because I think if you're going to have to deal with oversight, you only can end up with questions on why you brought somebody in without following the rest of the prescribed interview process on a competitive basis. And I don't like the ability to just hire somebody onto a full-time staff.
Well, and this would be, so there would have to be excellent justification, certainly. And I think, you know, again, it would be a determination by
And it would be
the board. So, and there,
a
you
board
know, I think
decision.
that there are unique situations and cases, but you know, it's something. It gives again a little bit of flexibility, so that if there is an opportunity that does arise, the district is positioned to be able to take advantage of it. However, it would be at the board's authority.
Right.
Yeah,
I don't know how, I don't know how Adria does it, but I know we had direct hire authority in USDA. Didn't get used very often, but we had it, and it still is there. And even though we have the words in our policies, Chris, unless the board would decide to approve it, it's not going to happen.
We have a thing with the university and extension that we can do a sporadic emergency hire or emergency hire. Especially considering, I'll give you an example. My admin assistant gives me a 2-week notice. Okay. So if you have 2 weeks before your entire office, financial, whatever is gonna, you at least want to, they will give you on authority to do an emergency hire to at least get someone in there part-time to help answer the phone, do that sort of thing, and not be as competitive. Like, that's not advertised. That's like, I know someone, and you know, it might be, hey, I know a student, or I know, you know, so and so, or a volunteer. A lot of times it happens where a master gardener gets hired part-time, or a 4-H volunteer might get hired part-time just to patch you over. Okay, but that's that's the hiring authority that they'll give to an office unit coordinator.
and that's on a case-by-case basis, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think there's a good, we haven't gotten to it yet until we get to hiring, but there's a very good section in here that talks about the executive developer presenting a hiring plan to the board. And certainly in an emergency situation like that, I think, you know, the board could have discretion to say, okay, here's how we deal with it. Modify the plan or accept the plan or whatever. But you know, that direction, I think, is something that we got to look at the good of the district. I can't think of many instances where we would bypass a competitive exam process. But I think the mechanism of doing a hiring plan with the executive director could help us deal with exigencies like Adrian's bringing up.
I agree. And I think,
There could be an instance, I'm sorry, Laura. There could be an
Laura?
instance where we might need to replace somebody really quickly. If someone got sick or if something happened, there was an emergency medical situation with one of the employees. We would want to be able to. Everybody's always willing to help and be a volunteer and come in, but things might go on, and we need to fill that vacancy as quick as we could temporarily, and then advertise it competitively.
And
I
that
think
makes
what I'm
sense.
hearing,
And I can also
I'm
see
sorry,
it if-
Chris. I didn't see that you were trying to talk.
sorry,
Go ahead.
that makes perfect sense. I was trying to say, I agree fully. And I could also see it happening if there was a very senior person with a specific need that fit very well into a strategic plan and a discussion beforehand with the board and the executive director on, opportunities for this, that a person could get hired, maybe even just like a senior intern, sort of, in a very defined role. But I have a little bit of difficulty when we're hiring somebody for full-time where there's a benefit package and, medical insurance without going through a competitive process. I just think that raises too many questions.
so I think the question
think-
is, do we need to have an agreement to take it out or keep it in and then make a vote on that?
What's that?
I would,
I
I would-
think we understand Chris's concern, but I don't think we should take it out. It's kind of an emergency authority anyway, and the board would still need to approve it.
I agree.
Let's find the authority then, or in very special instances.
I think the way it reads is I would just recommend keeping it in there, given that it has to come to a board vote anyway.
So I think I understand this, very well. And what I would really suggest is keeping that flexibility in there, because it's a flexibility for the board to decide when to authorize it, right? And so as the executive director, I might provide a recommendation and say, hey, there's somebody who we need to really kind of bring on, or everything. I've learned my lesson, over this last year. So we don't need to necessarily bring that up anymore. Moving forward, this provides you with the flexibility. If you don't have it in your policy, then you kind of question it in the future about whether or not it's an opportunity. I would say you're right for those senior level positions. I want to give you another example. John Marshall Soil and Water Conservation District, their executive director, the person who was serving as their district manager, gave 2 weeks notice and then departed. And I think they had to put in an acting district manager. They appointed somebody. They didn't go through the interview process for that. And so this gives you that flexibility to be able to make those kinds of direct hires, even from that temporary standpoint. Maybe you can, move forward with doing something more permanent, or it gives the board that opportunity to put somebody in there permanently if you feel that they're working out. So anyway, I hear what you're saying. I think this just, again, provides that flexibility, recognizes the authority of the board to make that ultimate decision.
Any other discussion to that point? Chris? Did I hear you?
No, I don't further, but I still agree with what I said.
Understanding that Chris still is not real happy with that whole notion, I sense that at least some of the board would like to leave it in there as an authority we have in case of an emergency.
Then it should be stated as in case of emergency, or for a limited time.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the way it's stated.
Which
Yep.
specific passage are we talking about?
Where was it in the verbiage that you gave us?
It's
Sorry,
under, I'm sorry, go ahead, Laura.
No, I'm sorry, Monica. We're probably looking at the same thing. It's a small section and under announcements of vacancies, that the announcement period of job vacancies shall be 2 weeks unless otherwise recommended by the executive director and authorized by the board of directors.
I read that if you wanted to do 1 week or 3 weeks, and that it specifically that reflects on the 2 week time frame, not the fact that you can eliminate the advertisement altogether.
And I'm sorry, the better place for actually this conversation is actually the first line of the policy, which is appointments to NVSWCD positions must be on a competitive basis unless otherwise authorized by the board of directors.
Right.
And I think you can just leave it at that. I don't know if you need to get any more specific because, again, it's the board's authorization.
That's right. I think that covers it.
Yeah, yeah.
Did we just pass over all the leave section?
Well, we're not.
Yes,
We're
we
not off
did.
of-
We jumped.
I got one more comment on section 1,
Go ahead, Jerry.
and this is not a big one, but the last bullet under office manager. I know that Heather gets a lot out of being a member of the Society of Human Resource Management. We want to make that a policy, and why?
I would, because then it provides the district with a direct connection with SHRM and all of the resources that are available that come with it. So, I mean, it really kind of just acknowledges it as a commitment that the district is making to again recognize the value of that administrative component. We have incorporated it into the budget, so it. Yeah, I think it. I mean, I think it's fine being in the policies. Is there a reason why you would want to exclude it?
I mean, I can think of all kinds of societies I'd want to have people to, but do you want to put it in the policy?
And why just that particular organization?
Yeah.
It's
and
that
why-
particular, that is like the premier and only organization for human resources. That's the only problem. It's like, it's not like if there's 6 different cancer organizations. This is specific to human, like it's a nationally renowned, it sets the guidelines for human
It's like
resources.
the ISA for arborists, or
Yeah, it's very, and it's very, I don't know, that from a person, unless they change and they suddenly become horrible. I think, well, and also we should note that this personnel policy is something to be reviewed. It's not set in stone. This is a review process. So should something change and it becomes a detrimental bullet point, I think for the current place and current status, Society for Human Resources is a go-to for all human resource management. And if that were to change for some reason, we do have the flexibility to alter this personnel map policy.
Why should it be the office manager instead of the executive director? The office
Because-
director is going to have no responsibility for managing people.
Well, but actually that's where all the certification, the training, it's what supplies the executive director with the fundamental information to help guide the decision making. Like Laura you can't have, if Laura were to have access to it, she would be, but that would take so much time away from her job. Part of that is the delegation to that office manager to be able to provide her with that information. Because otherwise, if you have an account, for example, then the office manager can't get into the account if it's Laura's account. Like that's not ethical and she can't just tap into her using her account. So someone has to be on top of ensuring they're getting all the information and consistently checking it up for updates and providing any kind of training that's helpful and useful to the staff. Then you would say that the onus would then be on Laura to do that in addition to her job. Whereas the office manager is the one that collects that information, provides it to the executive director, and then the executive director utilizes it to the way that she should and delegates that ability to, that's why it is an office manager's job in many ways.
By the way, there are a lot of other organizations who require a specific position to be a registered professional or a certified professional, so this kind of fits. And Laura, I
What-
take it that's where you wanted that, was with the office manager, the current office manager.
Right. I think that this is something, again, we're looking at this being a long living document. And one of the lessons, again, that we've learned over the last 8 years is the value of that SHRM membership. It helps to answer questions, helps to, again, provide us with all sorts of background information. And for the reasons, actually, Monica just explained that's the reasons why it's under the office manager. She does a lot of that research and collects that background information for us to be able to make decisions.
But as our organization might change in the future, our board, in reviewing this, can always adjust that.
Correct.
And along that lines, what happens if, we're highly dependent on one income strain from the county? What happens if the county has a budget crunch, which could have happened, and cuts 3/4 of our budget, and we have to release 3 or half of our staff? Do we still retain an office manager? And would those duties all just go to the executive director?
That's a decision we'll have to make, Chris.
I'm just wondering if, we're defining a position as if it has to exist.
Well, then you could say that for the executive director as well. I mean,
Yeah.
for right now, we are in this space and we have an office
Yeah.
manager and we have to address the office manager position.
And we could face those kind of decisions and we'd have to make them.
Yep. All hell would break loose.
Yeah,
And we'd probably change these personnel policies anyway.
yeah, absolutely. If we had that kind of a budget crunch and we had to reduce our staff in half, we'd have a very difficult time. Anything else? Where are we on this? Jerry, did you have anything else under 1?
No.
I thought your comments were good ones.
Mhm.
Are we down to leave then?
Thank you, Jerry. Yes.
Just a minute. I've got to take a real estate call.
Oh,
Okay,
What got me?
okay. Should we take 5 or 10 minutes?
Sure.
You want to take 5 or 10 minutes
sure,
and take a break?
sure.
If you do, well, I've got 10 minutes after 5. Why don't we come back at 20 after? By the way, how long have we agreed we would go today?
I think we had talked about wrapping up at about 5:30. And we are just about there. So, if we need to go longer, I'm okay with that. It's up to
Maybe we
y'all.
should just talk a little bit about where we are and what we're going to do next. And at 5:30, decide we can adjourn for the evening. We're going to come back tomorrow a little bit anyway, aren't we?
Well, we'll be together for the technical review committee meeting.
For the TRC, yeah, it's not the board.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I don't think we've got anything scheduled. We do have our meeting prior to the board meeting next week.
Yeah.
But
Let's let Jerry take his real estate call and we'll just continue till 5:30. How's that?
okay.
Can you all hold out till 5:30?
Oh, yeah, I can keep going. I mean, I'd rather get through some of this stuff than not.
Well, and I'm presuming since I just got this and hadn't had a chance to review it, I wish I had, Monica, so I apologize.
That's
But if
okay.
I've got any thoughts on it, I'll get them back to you.
Okay, that would be great.
And I do have some thoughts on roles that I'll get back to everybody. I mean, when I send them back to you, Monica, I'll send them to everybody.
Yes, please.
done? Are we down to leave?
We are at leave, correct.
Do Adria or Chris or even Laura want to say anything about the leave section? It's an awful long section.
Yeah.
So let me just explain. So again, leave is probably the less tumultuous of all of the sections, I think,
Yes.
because it really is documenting our current tacit policies, and it goes through and just explains a little bit more of, particular policies. You're going to see throughout this section that there's a number of comments that refer back to existing policies that we have, and things like that. Now, where there is an interesting aspect is the Family Medical Leave Act. Because we are a public entity, we are required to follow the FMLA, but because we have less than 50 employees, it's a very strange kind of combination. They don't technically apply. Anyway, what I think, we did incorporate the Family Medical Leave Act into this, and really what is our intent is to provide that benefit, which is job protection for merit employees, who basically those that have benefits, to be able to protect their position for that 12 work week period while they're needing to care for a loved one.
Laura,
So
does this language come out of the act?
a lot of it comes out of the act. A lot of it comes from Fairfax County. And this is the policy that we have applied in the past as well when we've had staff members who have needed to utilize it.
Have we had any opportunities yet to look at this language that came out of the act to make sure it's consistent with all the rest of our leave language?
Yes, we have. And there is, so especially when it comes to paid family leave, that would be, oftentimes referred to as parental leave. There's actually a little bit more that the county has provided in regards to paid family leave, which I think is really very, very generous as well, and is something that I would really encourage. I would encourage you all to really take a look at these two sections, because these are unique. I think when we were looking at other districts and their policies as it relates to parental, family leave and things like that, not necessarily Family Medical Leave Act, but leave for the birth or adoption of a child, for example. Some districts have it and some districts don't. And so there is quite a bit of difference in the way that districts implement this kind of policy. I think that having a generous policy is a great way of building loyalty into our system. I think it demonstrates certainly a maturity within our organization and a recognition of the value that our staff provide as well. So, but I would really encourage you to take a look at those in particular, those leave sections.
Laura, I'm sure we all will, but what's the difference between paid family leave and the act itself?
It's a difference in terms of one is job protection, the other one is paid leave. So job protection is the Family Medical Leave Act. Paid leave is the family medical family leave, paid family.
So we really should read this and
right. To kind of keep it in mind from a budgetary perspective, we plan the year for full-time employment. So all of our staff, aside from those that are on hourly rate wage, but we plan for that year ahead. So those funds are available.
Okay, thank you.
If that is a concern.
Any other questions? We could always get our questions or comments back into everybody, but any other questions on the leave section? Either Adria or Monica or Laura or Chris?
No, John, I'm good.
Okay. We're down to, I think then we're down to recruitment, selection, appointment, and probation. And once again, I apologize for just getting this today and not really having time to read it, but I will get some comments back in.
Okay.
Some thoughts in. Monica, do you or Laura or anybody want to talk about this section a little bit?
So recruitment selection. I mean, this was, we really just, it's, I don't know, John, it's pretty
I'm sorry,
self.
everyone.
I apologize. I didn't really
I got
have
my condo up for
anything.
sale in Maryland,
Okay,
and
this,
I got to take these calls. I'm selling the place myself.
that's okay, Jerry. This would be the section though where any of our policy relating to employee grievances would be found or not?
Well, there's still a whole
No.
grievance, I believe.
Is that a separate section?
That's a separate section. This is just on hiring.
Gotcha.
We will go through the conduct, discipline, and grievance processes at
Okay,
next meeting.
I got.
There is a demotion space in here during the probationary period, but it's not, so it's hiring. So even, but it does address, for example, if you hire within or I believe, give a promotion. So the probationary period does impact that promotion. So that's within this area too, but it is not grievance or discipline. So this speaks to the probationary period of hires and demotions and promotions. So you may want to look at that.
I think it would be important to look at it. And like I say, I apologize for not having done it.
No, that's fine. I understand. Yeah, so that's where I would suggest, I mean, look at the whole thing, obviously, but
Right.
we did review it. Gary, I think you were on this one too. Weren't you there with us on this one, I think?
I think Jerry's tied up with another business.
I'm off
transaction.
that now, and I apologize for doing that.
That's okay. It's big money time, Jerry. I get it. They're like hotcakes right now. You just go high. Go high, Jerry.
Where are we?
We're on the recruitment, examination, appointment, promotions, demotions
Right.
section.
You looking for a new topic?
Pardon me?
Are we finished with that one, or?
No, that we just
We-
started it. So if
we
you have
haven't.
anything to add, although you were part of that conversation, I think, too. So
Some of them, yeah, I attended a couple of meetings.
this
There's
is
a
the
couple of
last one.
comments that you're going to see in the sidebar for this, and one of the things that I wanted to mention is job announcements. So again, our policy is to advertise announcements. I want to make sure it can be it can cost as much to run the watershed model for a year as it costs to advertise a position for 2 weeks. So I think we need to, make sure that in future budget iterations, you'll see this in one of my comments, that we'll need to set aside some funds perhaps for job announcements. Even if we don't use it, just knowing that it's there instead of having to draw out of Chestnut Fund and things like that. So just that's something that Chris, just as a heads up, something we might want to consider as a finance committee and how we make that arrangement and what that looks like in future budgets.
Laura, when you say it costs as much to run the watershed model for a year as it costs to advertise for 2 weeks, what does it cost to advertise for 2 weeks?
Well, we sometimes spend about $200 a year on sprinkles and and other things and Kool-Aid for the watershed model. It can cost upwards of about $200 to run an advertisement on some of these different recruiting sites.
Okay.
So it's just something to kind of take into consideration, and also recognizing where people are going to look for positions where we can draw, some good candidates. That's something else that I'll be looking into over the course of this next year as well. There is the government jobs site. There's, of course, NACD, the Virginia Association, which will advertise our positions at no cost. But those are some things that we'll have to think about, whether there's a good way of being able to advertise some of our positions. It would be great to advertise them alongside Fairfax County's positions. How we make that happen, I'll have to kind of figure that out. That would take us into a whole different process. So, but word of mouth is oftentimes a great way of getting the word out. But Indeed.com, LinkedIn, some of these other sites that are used, for job advertising, it does cost a little bit of money just to advertise them. Oftentimes, the minimum advertisements is a month. So,
As I look at this, I see under performance management, conduct and discipline, grievance and position descriptions, that's what we still need to flesh out more. Is that right?
Conduct and
And if,
discipline, grievance and procedures, yes, those have to be flushed out. But I do think that, yeah,
and some of us, myself particularly, really need to take a good hard look at this and get any comments back, not only to you, Monica, but to all of us.
yes,
And I
because it would be
appreciate,
easier. Yeah, if we could do that, John, I'm sorry to interrupt. If we could have those comments come back, it might be good for other people to see those comments. I'm
yeah,
not sure if we can share them before them, it might be, if we could make this a working document, but I'm not really sure if we can. At this phase, just because we're already going into May, it might be nice to see what other people.
when was your group going to meet again, Monica?
Early May, I think, sometime.
May 6th is our next meeting. And that's when we will review those sections that you were just referring to, John. And again, this will all come back up before the board, through our executive operations committee for continued review. I think that the idea of getting any comments and any track changes back to Monica is a great one. And Monica, you may be able to compile some of those. Some of them, like some of the wordsmithing that we've even heard today, can be easily incorporated. And then I think if there's anything major that we need to discuss as a group, that might be a good thing to bring forward at the May Executive Operations Committee meeting.
Yes, thank you. Because it would be easier to go through and say, okay, these are the areas that people had issue with, so let's discuss them. And that way it'll be easier because it pops out. And then we have the ability to like directly go to the topic. We only have a little bit of this left, but I also, if there are ideas for things that are missing, or that have come up in, during this time that, oh, I wish I would have mentioned this, or I wish I would have said that, it's good, just get back and include that, because that would be helpful to make sure we capture everything.
But this has been a really big effort to try to document, things, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be changes in the future, because we do want to make sure that we're also putting in place a process where we can review this on an annual basis and make adjustments. So that's something that, again, Monica, we can talk a little bit more as as we head into June and talk about what that process might look like.
And
I'll try to get any thoughts I have back to you all before the week is over.
And if you have any specific thoughts as to what the actual there's a paragraph on board authority, right? So it's small. So like if you think that there's something else you want to see that we need to discuss, I think it's important to get it clarified so we can at least have that conversation, to have it up there. That would be helpful. Because it's, as I mentioned to Laura when we were going through this, it filters through everything, right? So when you give an authority to something, it ends up filtering through all sorts of components throughout the rest of the document. So to be able to kind of help clarify that on the forefront, it helps guide the rest of the document when there's questions that arise, like, oh, but we should be doing this. Well, that's not in the main frame of the authority, and that's where it should capture that, right? Like, so that we can go back to that authority piece and say, we have the authority to do X, Y, and Z. And so therefore, when we're talking about grievance, it fits. Or instead of trying to make our authority fit into a topic that we want to influence, we should have make sure that in that collective space, where it's a comprehensive view of what the board authority is, it kind of outlines what we do, so then we can we can say, yeah, that's connected, right? Like that's, maybe we address that during the executive operations space. Maybe that's already addressed. Or if it's not addressed, maybe then we look and say, well, maybe that's an authority we should have that we don't have. So I think
Monica,
that is
you're talking,
action.
you're talking about just those 6 bullets under the authority section for the board of directors?
Right, because I think
Yeah.
it's important for us to really clarify, like, what does it mean? And when we go into a detail of what we should be doing, then we need to take a step back and say, okay, is that being addressed? Like, for example, we should have a communication system. Well, the executive meeting before the board meeting is a space for communication between the executive director and the board. So if that feels like it's not satisfying a need, then let's identify what that means and where does that fit in what the board needs. Or at least an area to discuss and expand upon, just to make sure that we're all on the same page and there's no confusion as to where our authority lies, where our communication process is or isn't. I think that there's been some confusion with that. And, the point of this is to try to clarify it. But, in some ways, some people are just reading this personnel document for the first time and going, oh, yeah, we do have this, or, oh, yeah, that existed. And it's.
I'm just one person, but my thought is we're probably going to want to come back and talk about board and executive director authorities or roles at some point after today again. I'm going to offer you a number of ideas for consideration, but to me, this is probably the sticking point that we're all going to have to deal with quickly if we can, and try to make sure we either have an agreement on those authorities and roles and responsibilities, or if we don't, how are we going to resolve it?
And does the governance tie into that? Because I haven't been to any governance meetings, so I don't understand that component. If someone can help me explain the intersection.
It certainly might. I suspect I might even ask either Adria or Laura about that, but we're at that 5:30 mark. Do you guys want to go on for a few more minutes, or do you want to call a halt today and come back on this? I've appreciated this discussion. I appreciate Jerry having had the time to at least look at part of it.
That's all I did since I got it. Read it.
Anybody? Adria or Laura, do you want to say a word just about governance and then we'll wrap up?
Go ahead, Laura, you go first.
So you will see that there was a kind of a matrix that was developed for all of the different elements that could be incorporated into our board operating procedures document. And again, I think when we look at roles and responsibilities, having some clarity on all of the different roles and responsibilities, I think are really, really important, particularly as it comes to the board. It's helpful for us when we think about recruiting new board members, when we're talking about what the responsibilities are. Not that we want to hand somebody a 50-page document and say, boom, here's everything that you've got to do, because it is much more than that. But being sure that there is some clarity in terms of, again, what those expectations are that we all hold of each other. And so I do think that with the governance, we've only had one meeting. And during that meeting, we did review this matrix. And where we did get hung up was related to personnel management. And the section that we do not have much information on that's written down is personnel management. So there's quite a bit that we're going to need to that again, we're creating that has been tacit policies or tacit ways of doing things that we're really, again, trying to document. And I think even today, again, there's some differences of opinion in terms of what that looks like. What does it look like when it's being implemented? So those are some things that I think that are consistent between the two groups. There is a lot of items that we do have already. Sometimes it's just pulling straight from the grant agreement with DCR. Sometimes it's pulling straight from the state code. Sometimes it's pulling from materials that have been around for a long time, but perhaps haven't been readily available. So want to make sure again that we're pulling all of these pieces together so that everybody can see them, and we can review them and update them, as necessary. So there's a large part, again, where I'd like the board on the governance side to really take in some things into consideration is the management of the executive director. We have some processes in place, again, that have worked very, very well, that we need to document, and so that it's clear what everybody's roles and responsibilities are in doing so, and what the board's responsibility is in doing so. Defining the roles of our individual officers is something that's also really important, has not been done before. And so, again, there are pieces, there are processes and procedures that are already in place. We document them, we can review them, and we can, again, move forward. So it'll be really interesting as we start to really put some of these items down on paper, figuring out whether there are any areas where there are really distinct differences in opinion, on what the roles are and what they ought to be. So
Well,
we've talked a lot. I'm sorry, Jen, my last comment. We've talked a lot about the Dakota County Soil and Water Conservation District's procedures. That was an example. It's not our procedures. And I just want to make that clear because they're very different. The language that's used is very different than perhaps we might want to define ourselves. It's a good procedures and it works for them, and that's great. So go ahead, Jerry.
I like part of the Dakota procedures where they pay the directors $75 for every day they do something.
yeah.
Could we adopt that?
What I was going to say, in addition, Laura, a lot of what governance
I'd be
is
rich, Jerry. I'd be rich.
Yeah.
is really found as we define the roles, particularly of the board of directors. So that's where the two really do key in. I've really appreciated the discussion today, even though I was delinquent in not being up to speed on it. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to offer before we adjourn tonight? Laura or Adrian, do you want to say anything about the TRC tomorrow? I think we start early.
Well, before we jump over to the TRC, Adria, I don't know if you had anything else that you wanted to add related to the governance group.
She's on mute.
Excuse me. Sorry. What I would add is, we went through, all this matrix got emailed out to you all, and we went through this matrix and kind of went through what we need to fill out, what we have existing, like Laura had said. And there's there really are a lot of things that we do need to develop, and some stuff that we never really had. If you think about social media policies, campaigning and using social media and those sort of things, those are all new and may even change as in the future. I will say that the county has some good information too to draw on some of these things that we want to develop as well. So, but I think that 2 hours on a meeting tonight might be enough for me. I've had a busy day. We had our IT kind of things switched around here in the office, and I'm still making sure that every cord is plugged in the right spot. So I totally get it as far as your computer problems, Chris, and so forth.
Adrian, can I make one suggestion?
Sure.
The way I read.
One of the advantages that John has mentioned of our going through this process and kind of defining, the Northern Virginia way of managing a district, is that we would become an example for other districts, and I like that idea. But in that regard, I see the references in the notes for these different things. A couple of times we mentioned the grant agreement, but I wrote a lot of stuff in the other material that both VASWCD and DCR put out. I would encourage the governance committee make sure the good parts of those documents are also reflected in this document, not just Fairfax County.
Good
Oh,
point.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that there are things that we can look beyond Fairfax County for sure. We're not the be all end all.
Yes.
I think that there are some good examples. We're the only one that has a WID really in the state. And so if there was someone to look to that, they would look immediately to our policies for how we might deal with a WID, or that someone else might deal with a WID somewhere else in the state, or maybe somewhere else in another state for that matter. But no, I think that, a lot of these policies that we have that exist are good, that might even be, like you said, be able to lean on for others. So, oh, I think that we got our work cut out for us.
John, can I make one final comment?
Yes.
Request. In regard to the strategic plan, Laura did a great job in getting together the SWOT at a meeting we had recently, and good ideas came out. I want to kind of finish up that process. I sat down after that meeting and made a list, including several of the recommendations from the SWOT, of things I would like to see us address as a board, for things to include in the strategic plan, particularly things that we're not doing now. Okay, where do we see us going? I'd asked all the board members to submit their ideas like that, including the ones from the SWAT that they want to promote. And I didn't send my ideas out because I didn't want to prejudice the process. I want to independently take everybody's suggestions, sort them and slice them and dice them so that everybody can talk about those things and we get that discussion going. We're never going to make July 1st if we don't get going. So please send me your ideas.
Yeah, we got your note, Jerry, and I think I commented recently on it again. I'll get you my thoughts, and Laura, get you my thoughts very quickly. Is there anything else though that needs to come up tonight? Yes, Laura.
John, just one thing. I think as you all are reviewing that list on the governance and board operating procedures, I know that it's a skeleton right now, and that's purposeful because we're trying to, again, figure out all of the different things that might want to go in there. If you notice that there is something that perhaps is not on the list or may not be necessarily explicitly acknowledged, will you please, Adria, I'll take this off your hand. If you'll send that to me, I'd be happy to compile them for the next opportunity when we are getting together in May, which is May 14th. So we'll have an opportunity to bring them up at that time and again acknowledge. So if you have, again, these are general, topics and things like that you would like to bring up, I would appreciate that.
We'll do that, Laura. Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I see Laura, I heard Chris, and see Laura, or see Adria. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. I want to thank you all. I got a lot out of this tonight. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Monica, for leading the charge on the personnel policies. We've got work to do, don't we?
Yeah, I just realized my hand has been going up and it probably looks like I have some kind of zombification of it. I was doing weeding this weekend and I got something. I don't know if they're chiggers that bit me up, but I have been putting on Benadryl and calamine and it is just, oh, I'm puffy and I've got a million bites. I don't know.
Poison ivy?
Ivy or poison oak.
Take your
Maybe.
bites back.
Not poison ivy or poison oak, is it?
I don't know. I don't know. It's so itchy. I can't stop. And then I realized I'm showing my hands. I'm like, look at it. It's horrifying.
And we'll see, I guess, Adria, we'll see you in the TRC tomorrow at 9. Is that
Yep,
correct?
9 o'clock. We'll see you then.
9 till noon.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good night, all.
Thank you all.
Right. Thank you.